All right, here we go. Second online lecture. This one's in regards to the economic theories. Again, I'll just, because it's only our second time, but I'll remind you, best thing would be either to have these slides open on your iPad and then I annotate to make notes on top of them, or print out that outline version of the slides so that way you can take notes on those. So you got kind of two choices, again, like we talked about previously in class. But today we're going to talk a little bit about economic theories. Again, economics is the second part of our class, last third of the year. But we do need to talk a little bit about economics as we talk about governments, because they do play a role in how our governments function and the role that they take inside our society, especially as they deal with the marketplace and goods. So let's talk about economic theories. First and foremost, it's important to understand what economics is. And for the most part, in relationship to countries or nations, it's the idea of what to produce, how much to produce, and whom should receive the goods in society. Some countries, this is defined by what they have. For example, a country such as Colombia, right, has a pretty heavy coffee growth and the ability to grow coffee beans and also cocoa beans, and so that becomes what they produce, and that's what they focus it on. A country like the United States, we obviously have a lot of unique natural resources, as well as a lot of people and a lot of different skill sets amongst our people. So this question gets defined much more broadly in our country because there's so many different things. But again, also keep in mind that last part of the phrase, which is whom should receive the goods in society. That's an important piece to this element. So not only about what and how much, but also who should get it. And this becomes an important piece to economics. We're going to start with capitalism because in theory that's what we have in the United States, although there are some limitations, as you will see. But the idea of capitalism was truly defined by another one of these Enlightenment thinkers. Again, Adam Smith is along the lines of Karl Marx and John Locke and other guys we've talked about. But Adam Smith wrote a book called Wealth of Nations. And for those of you that are going to attend, maybe one of the UCs or the Cal States, this is not an uncommon book to read, at least a portion of it. It's around 800 pages long. So would you read the entire book? Maybe not, but you will definitely read portions of it. And in this book, Adam Smith defined his concept of what the marketplace should look like under the idea of capitalism. And in this case, he talked about something, a French term that he referred to called laissez-faire, and basically this means to let it be. In other words, the government should stay out of the marketplace. It should have no role, that we should just determine the price of goods based on the marketplace itself. How much are you willing to pay for something? Well, that's how much it's worth. And again, we get that a little bit in our country, and there's certainly some elements of it, but obviously in the United States, there is some other elements to include. But for Adam Smith, the idea was to just get out of the way, let the marketplace handle all pricing, all issues, or all those economic questions we talked about on the previous slide. For capitalism to work, there are 5 key elements, and the first of these is this idea of private ownership, and this would be basically the idea that all elements in society that are going to be used to produce something are owned privately. We certainly think about that in a simple way with many of the companies that we go and let's say, for example, at lunch, maybe you like going to Chipotle or McDonald's or what have you. Well, that's private ownership. Those are privately owned, although some of them are traded publicly, but they are still stocks that are owned by individual people. And those places are privately owned organizations. All the land should be privately owned. No government ownership of property or production. That's the concept of private ownership. Many of your parents may own their own business, and in whatever form that is, obviously they own it, they run it, and they manage it. Okay, so that's the idea here of private ownership. Second is free enterprise. You have a cool idea, you have something new that you can come up with. Well, free enterprise is the way to go, and certainly that's an important element to capitalism. We have seen this in our country innumerably, a lot of new inventions, creations, things of that nature, new ideas that come up, and certainly you think of technology in this as the most obvious with things like, everything ranging from our iPods, which are starting to become outdated, because you have things like an iPhone or a Droid or something along those lines, or now with our iPads, right? What a great new idea. And the ability to make those new ideas is up to individual ownership properties within the society, and they're free to do that. So they come up with something new and you want to sell it and you think it's the best thing to do, go ahead. Next up, we need competition. And this is really, really critical. And this is what some people have struggled with in regards to capitalism, is this idea of competition, because ultimately the strong are going to survive. And if you can produce your product for a lower price at a better quality, well, then you're gonna win out, and you're gonna be able to control the marketplace a little bit. But competition is important to control pricing. And you start to think about how this works and how competition can help us. Again, you may have different viewpoints on food, and I think food's the real obvious one because there is so much competition. But I'll give you two examples. The first is Chipotle, and obviously many of us enjoy Chipotle. It's right there across the street, very convenient. But there is a competitor now located a little bit farther down in the form of Freebird, and maybe you've been there, maybe you haven't. But again, it's a similar idea to Chipotle, just a little different. But again, the idea would be that maybe Freebird makes Chipotle better. Maybe that competition of having another burrito place or a place that serves that type of food will help both companies maybe give us better pricing or maybe better products, and that's okay for us. The other thing about competition is that maybe the price point of those burritos are a little bit higher than we'd like to pay, right? It costs $5, maybe $6 to get a burrito at Chipotle, but you could go to Del Taco or Taco Bell and get a burrito for under $1. And so that may be something that's important. But that competition is also part of the process. And it leads us right into this next idea, which is freedom of choice. You can do what you want in the marketplace. As a consumer, you can choose how you want to buy products. This isn't always the case, but it is most of the time that you get to choose the products you want to buy and where you buy them from. So again, if you really like Chipotle and you're willing to spend that much money for a burrito, man, you should go there, and you have the right to do it. If you want to, maybe you don't have that kind of money to spend on lunch and you'd rather spend a little less, then go to Taco Bell or go to Del Taco or a lower priced establishment, and that's your choice to do it. And certainly as consumers, we have those choices. And then finally, you have the freedom to make money. And this is important as well, right? These business owners have the right to profit, and by profiting off their successes in the marketplace, that they have a right to do it. And we expect it, right? We don't go in to buy something and say, you know what, I think I should be the only one that gets something here. You don't have a right to make money. We all understand that people have a right to make money, and so we're willing to spend a little bit more maybe for something we like, because we know that they get the right to make money, and so we're okay with that, but we're also going to shop around, and so those companies better be willing to do their best to make sure that they're not gouging us for profits. But again, the freedom of profits is certainly out there. You have some unique idea, go ahead, make that money. Now in the United States, we don't have pure capitalism. In some forms we do, but for the most part, we have free enterprise with some government support. And what happens is in the marketplace, and there's a lot of different examples. If you've ever read the book The Lorax, and if you recall in this particular book, a little character gets caught up in a situation where a person is destroying natural resources. He's basically cutting down all these trees and built a factory to produce a product that pollutes water and the air, and ultimately it wipes it out, and now they can't even produce that product anymore because the trees die off, and basically the land is barren. Well, our government will step in and make sure that people aren't doing that they're making sure that people don't go around polluting rivers or polluting the skies, or potentially making products in a way that would hurt the workers. Maybe you recall in U.S. history the idea of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory, this situation where this producer of clothing had all these women working in locked rooms high up in an office complex. The building caught on fire, and the women were locked in because the business owners didn't want them leaving. They didn't want them sneaking out. They only wanted them to use breaks and all that kind of stuff. And so what ends up happening is they plunge out the windows to escape the fire and die on the streets of Chicago. Well, that inspires our government to get involved and make businesses have things like fire escapes, or make sure you don't lock people into rooms that they can't get out of, etc. And so, or maybe even rules about how long people can work or how old you have to be to work. And some of you probably deal with that as you've tried to find jobs. So again, the idea that the government is involved is certainly an element of our mixed market. Also, for what it's worth, it is a really important element to understand that this is a huge disagreement in our country, the United States, in regards to how we should handle our budget and our debt. How much should the government be involved in our lives, and how much we want them out of our lives. And both political parties run into these dilemmas, and we'll talk about it as we move forward. But this is one of those areas, the amount of government support of free enterprise that these political parties argue over. Okay, but we do have a mixed market in the United States. Okay, changing to socialism. This is a little bit different viewpoint. I switched from blue to red because this is the old colors going back to the day of the Cold War. So that's why we switched to red here for socialism. But socialism basically is defined where the basic means of production and resource allocation are controlled by the government. So instead of having Taco Bell, Levi, Apple, IBM, whatever, controlling the marketplace, it's the country themselves that control the means of production and how much resources are allocated. And so this is a form of socialism, a little bit different, or considerably different, because they will determine all the answers to those economic questions. There are three goals for socialism, and really it's sort of a very different format for us than we see in a capitalistic society or even a mixed market economy. But basically the idea would be that there is distribution of wealth and opportunity. Now the difference between, say, capitalism and socialism isn't so much the distribution of opportunity. I think we all feel like everyone should have a fair opportunity. Whether or not that turns into wealth is another issue. Well, in socialism, they feel like, hey, this should be more spread out, that the wealth and opportunity should be pretty equally distributed across the entirety of society. So a little bit different. Instead of having these extreme wealthy people and extreme poor people, you would have sort of a better balance. Second, the government does control production decisions. So again, how many loaves of bread are we going to make? How many, whatever, any product you can think of, they are going to decide how much to produce. So that decision is not made by the marketplace. It's not made by a company that's privately owned, but it's handled by the government themselves. They choose to make those decisions. And then finally, the land itself and the means of production are also owned by the public at large. Again, for the most part, whether it's a factory or a park or a building, all those things are owned by the public at large, the people that live inside that society, and then the government would be in charge of managing those things to make sure they operated correctly. So again, a very different look here with socialism. Now there's also kind of what's happened in Europe over time here, and again, you often get people complaining that to some extent even our current president, Barack Obama, is heading towards these socialist tendencies. Again, it's a little bit of a stretch. I mean, there's certainly some arguments to be made for some elements to that, but the places we need to look are in Western Europe now, and to some extent Eastern Europe. This idea that they've blended these things, and so the idea is that people would have basic human rights, and that the control over those governments making those decisions with free elections. So the government may be making decisions, but if they start to mess it up, people could vote those people out of office. That is sort of what we end up having in a lot of the countries in Western Europe. And you get these very, very strong industrialized nations, like Germany, for example, that have combined these two things together. Now, there's some downsides to those countries. In Germany, the tax rates are pretty significant. Probably somewhere between 40 and 46% of your income is going to some form of tax paid to the government. To give you a comparison, we complain in the United States about 23 to 24%. So almost double in most of those European nations. But again, that's part of the trade-off of having the government be involved with a lot of these organizations and things of that nature. A different version of socialism is the idea of communism. And again, we get another Enlightenment thinker. I mentioned him briefly in a previous our previous lecture, and it's Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto, and one of the big things here is, and again, by the way, another document that you for sure will read in college at some point. If you take any history, any political science course, any government course, you're definitely going to read this. It's only about 30 pages long, so not too bad. And it's sort of interesting, actually. Of all the political documents of this time, it's probably the easiest to read, partly because he was writing to working class people, and so that made him write in a way that was at least a little bit easier to understand for most of us. And it was written initially in German, and then translated in English. But regardless, one of the biggest things that was unique about Karl Marx, as compared to maybe other socialist ideals, was the idea of revolution. And this revolution, and this is really the point of emphasis that I would like to make here. So when you're trying to differentiate between socialism and communism, and the revolutionary element here is the idea that the working class, or what was referred to as the proletariat, would rise up against the owner class, or the bourgeoisie, and take them down. Now, this concept of revolution in this form, of the working class overthrowing the wealthy class, created, first of all, was the foundation of communism in the Soviet Union, or Russia, that turned into the Soviet Union, now has gone back to Russia. But what happened was, this is really where the initial elements to the Cold War started to scare people around the world. Anytime workers united in any form, people started to call them communists, and a lot of this happened from Karl Marx's idea. Again, if we wanted to use a current example, we can think about professional athletes, right? Professional athletes are part of a union, and a lot of people are concerned about the role that unions have. Well, just because the professional athletes would go on strike or potentially not work for a while, I don't think we believe they're communists. But during the Cold War era in our country and around the world, people did. Anytime workers started to fight for better wages or safer work environments or whatever it was, it turned into, well, they're communists. And so a lot of that happened because of this revolutionary idea. But again, I do want to point out, revolution is the key. It's a little bit more extreme form of socialism as we slide into more of revolutionary belief that Karl Marx held. Again, finally, once this revolution was ended and the working class took over, there would be one class. Property would be held in common, and there'd be no need for a government. Basically, everyone would work together. A little bit of a, kind of joke around and think it's sort of a kumbaya mentality here. We're all going to just hold hands and it'll all work out. Again, the reality of it is that the opposite occurred in some respects. In fact, the governments grew. I mean, the government in the Soviet Union had such a large bureaucracy. That's the term we use to refer to sort of the people who work for the government, whether it be elected officials or unelected officials. It was enormous. If you think about all the decisions that would have to be made by the government about production, it would be crazy. Again, a very simple thing. There was this factory that was being built in Siberia, and many of you guys know that Siberia is a pretty desolate, very cold area of the Soviet Union, or Russia now. And in Siberia, they have a lot of natural resources that you can't get anywhere else. Well, they built a place to extract some iron ore, some really rich resources there to extract iron ore. And that was a great plan. They got it out of the ground very inexpensively. Everything was great, except they realized that as they decided that or at some point they realized that they had to ship the ore to cities or transportation ports around the country of Russia. Well, they forgot to build the roads to do it. And as it turns out, they had to go back and they couldn't use the factory for about a year as they built the roads to get the stuff from the factory to the cities that it needed to get to. So again, just kind of an example of how there was just so many decisions that needed to be made, and things would get missed. And so very, very much the opposite sort of worked out here. And so we'll look at some other issues that come up with communism and socialism. But basically, here are some other negatives, is that it's going to stifle individual ingenuity. In other words, if you are in this society and you know that wealth and opportunity are supposed to be getting distributed equally, well then, why would you work hard? In what point would you want to come up with some new idea? Would they ever invent an iPad in a communist government? I don't know. Why would you want to? You're getting the money anyways. You'd sort of establish what would be the desire to do it. Would you really do it under the idea that you would help out, your fellow man. I suppose, but I think it's a little difficult because there's no payoff. Why would you, if you were deciding to go to school, why would you continue to educate yourself if you were going to sort of end up with the same income? Why would you be a doctor? Why would you be a highly skilled professional? Why do that? So that becomes a problem. Second, the idea of extremely high taxes. And, again, I mentioned we complain in the United States. We pay, somewhere between 18 and 27% to the federal government, and then another 8 or 10 to the state. But in those countries, you're talking about 45 to 65, 70% of your money is going to tax and cover some things that we pay for here, but you get for free. But again, we worry about things like healthcare, right, or maybe college education. Those things may be either very inexpensive or free, except that you're paying for them in taxes. And again, just a different way to look at the way the countries are run. But there's going to be high taxes, and again, that's going to stifle ingenuity. If you're going to make more money and just more and more of it's going to get given back to the government in taxes, the desire to work hard isn't always there. And then finally, the governments have become extremely large, and really the opposite of what maybe Karl Marx anticipated occurring has occurred. And so what this all has come down to is that in their purest forms, none of these government systems really work. They have to have, or economic systems, is that they have to have a way to blend a little bit together, that there has to be some level of freedom of individual ingenuity. There has to be some sort of freedom in the marketplace, but the government does have to have some role to sort of direct some traffic and make sure that the marketplace isn't just running out of control. Now, again, there are still belief systems out there that would think the opposite, and we'll get to them when we get to the political parties, but certainly there's a common belief that the government should really take itself totally out of the role of any part of the marketplace, and this is sort of the libertarian viewpoint. But again, we'll get to the political parties here very shortly, and we'll talk a little bit more about their beliefs. But this just gives you some idea of the different economic theories.